Welcome back to the deep dive. We usually spend our time here, dismantling a specific event or maybe a new piece of technology or a geopolitical shift. We really look at the what and the how. But today, I want to shift the axis a little. Today, we're looking at a who. And through that who, we are going to interrogate a concept that I think every single person listening has probably grappled with, usually at like 3 in the morning when they can't sleep.
The concept of escape.
Exactly. Escape. Now, in the standard lexicon, that word carries a lot of baggage. It's usually negative, right?
Sure. We think of a fugitive, someone running from the law.
Or the daydreamers dissociating from reality because they can't handle, the rent being due. It implies avoidance.
Cowardice. Even.
Right.
It implies a retreat from what we call the real. But the thesis we're sort of testing today, based on this, massive stack of primary sources we have here, is different. What if escape is actually a structural necessity for survival? What if it isn't about leaving a place, but about expanding the dimensions of the room you're trapped in?
So it's not running away, it's redesigning.
What if escape is actually an act of architectural redesign of the self?
That is the central question. And our guide for this, the architect, if you will, is a man named Manuel del Valle Colón. And we are looking at his work, specifically a monolithic collection of poetry titled Omnibus Poetry 56, Escape.
And you have to note the Roman numeral there, LVI.
56,
which is just staggering in itself. This is not a hobbyist throwing together a little chapbook.
No.
This is a lifelong dossier. And to call this just a poetry collection feels like a categorization error.
Yeah.
It's more like a blueprint of a mind.
A mind that has operated in the highest, most rigid tiers of the American legal system, while at the same time constructing this entire parallel existence in verse.
Right. And you see it right from the title page. You realize this isn't just a monocultural exploration. He doesn't just give us the English word escape.
No, and that feels so deliberate. He frames the whole concept linguistically from a global perspective.
He lists the Chinese taoju,
The Japanese nezuru,
the taihani. This is a signal right off the bat that the escape he's proposing isn't some singular act.
It's not just a Western idea.
No, it's a cross-cultural methodology. He's looking for the universal human mechanism of breaking free.
So let's establish the subject. Because if you looked at Manuel de Valle Colón's CV without seeing the poetry, if you just saw the LinkedIn profile, you would see a quintessential establishment figure.
Oh, absolutely. The man of the system.
On paper, yes.
Yeah.
You've got a Yale Law School graduate, class of 74. You have a former chief administrative law judge for the New York State Division of Human Rights.
A trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Labor. These are roles that are defined by constraint, by precedent, by procedure.
You do not improvise in these jobs.
No. You follow the rules. You enforce the rules.
Precisely.
But this source material, this 56th volume of poetry, it reveals the shadow side of that resume. Suddenly you see a student of Asian languages, a writer obsessing over nude shadows and wizards, a man grappling with something he calls the geometry of love.
So the tension here is just obvious and, frankly, fascinating. How does the judge, who has to deal in absolute truths and binary rulings...
Guilty or not guilty, liable or not liable.
Right. How does that person coexist with the poet who deals in ambiguity, in metaphor, in nuance?
That tension is the engine of this entire deep dive. But to really understand the escape, we first have to understand the confinement.
Yes. We have to look at the geography of his origin. Manuel wasn't born into the Ivy League. He did not start at the finish line.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He was born in October 1948, the eldest son of Puerto Rican parents, his father from Hatillo, his mother from Moca. And he was born in New York City, but the specific coordinates are vital here.
He grew up in the housing projects.
First, the Carver houses in East Harlem, and then later the Douglas projects in West Harlem.
Now, in, sociological texts from the 60s, or even just in casual conversation today, these locations, the projects, they're almost always analyzed as sites of deficit.
Places of poverty, crime, limitation.
Concrete boxes.
That's the standard narrative, right? The concrete jungle. But what stands out in all the archival material about his youth is the contrast. You have this physical reality of the projects, the noise, the struggle, the density.
Oh, the limitations.
And then inside this young man, there is this expansive, almost infinite intellect developing. He wasn't just living in apartment 4B. He was constructing a free world inside his own head.
So the first escape wasn't physical. He didn't run away. He went inward.
That's it. The intellectual escape predates any physical departure, and the clearest evidence for this is in the records from his high school.
Brooklyn Technical High School, class of 1966.
Brooklyn Tech, one of the legendary specialized high schools in New York.
We have a list of his extracurriculars here, and honestly, looking at it, I just wonder if the kid ever slept.
It reads like a frantic attempt to consume the entire world. He wasn't just attending school, he was devouring it.
Okay, so you've got the Free World Club, the polling squad, which you said was actually polling for New York City elections.
Yes, real elections. As a teenager, he was the manager of the fencing team,
Fencing, interesting.
a member of the debating society, and crucially, the Aspira Club.
Okay, let's pause on Aspira. For listeners who might not know the context of 1960s New York, what does that signify?
Aspira was, and it still is, the premier organization for Puerto Rican youth leadership. It was founded by the incredible Antonia Pantoja. And this was not just a social club.
No.
It was a training ground for political agency. The records show he was the Issues and Actions chairman of the Aspira Clubs Federation. He was literally being trained to lead his community.
But beyond the resume padding, what really struck me were the yearbook quotes. Usually, high school inscriptions are just throwaway lines. Stay sweet, have a great summer, don't change.
Right, HAGS.
But the inscriptions in Manuel's yearbook, they read like prophecies.
They are startlingly specific, aren't they?
Yeah.
You have a classmate, a Robert Snyder, who writes, "Best of luck in your search for complete knowledge."
Search for complete knowledge. I mean, who says that to a 17-year-old? That is a heavy mantle to place on someone.
It implies a philosophical quest, not just, good luck at college. And it continues.
Go on.
Robert Unger called him an amateur historian. Bruce Thompson wrote, "To my favorite philosopher." Richard Rosen called him the king of quotes.
Kick of quotes. Love that. It suggests he was already synthesizing information, already curating wisdom, even back then.
Exactly. And another one from Walford Linton says, "Good luck to a future intellectual." It just shows that his peers saw him as distinct. He wasn't just smart.
Yeah.
He possessed this, gravitational pull toward the archival, toward the systemic. He was already documenting his reality. Someone else calls him a gentleman and a scholar.
So, in the eyes of his peers, he had already escaped the stereotype of the project kid just by the sheer force of his intellect.
Exactly. The intellectual escape is successful. But then the physical departure does happen, and it follows a trajectory that is, almost mythical in the American meritocracy story.
Brooklyn Tech to the Ivy League.
But it's not a straight line, and I think that's important. He doesn't just walk into a secret society at Harvard.
Right.
He goes through the Yale Transitional Year program first, then he goes to Wesleyan University. And while he's at Wesleyan, he doesn't just stay in that bubble. He goes to Madrid to study Spanish literature.
Wow.
He works for the Edwin Gould Foundation, recruiting other minority students. And then finally, he transfers to Princeton.
Princeton University, class of 1971.
Correct. And while he's at Princeton, what does he do? He founds the Latino organization on campus. But for me, this is the key moment, the moment where the historian meets the activist.
His senior thesis.
His senior thesis. He wrote about the history of the Puerto Rican student and public education.
Which, on its face, sounds like a standard academic paper. Here is my research. Give me my grade. Thank you very much.
But it wasn't. It absolutely was not. One of the chapters of that very thesis was incorporated into a memorandum for Senator Jacob Javits.
Who he was interning for.
That memorandum was then used in a hearing before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And eventually, that research, that history, became part of the legal framework for the Aspira litigation.
Wait, hold on. Let's connect the dots here for a second. He joins the Aspira Club in high school. He then writes a history of Puerto Rican students in college for his thesis.
Yes.
And that college homework, that paper, literally helps change the law.
Essentially, yes. The Aspira consent decree secured bilingual education for children with limited English proficiency in New York City. You have to understand, before this, those kids were often just lost in the system.
Right, just sitting in classrooms they couldn't understand.
Exactly. This decree gave them a voice. It gave them a chance to actually learn.
This is the absolute definition of knowledge as power.
It is, and it illustrates the true nature of his escape. He used his escape to the Ivy League to acquire the tools of the establishment, legal research, historical analysis, access to senators.
And then what?
He then turned right around and used those very tools to dismantle the barriers that were keeping his community down.
Yeah.
He escaped the projects so he could return and break the locks for everyone else.
Which leads us directly into his legal career. He graduates Princeton, he teaches at Phillips Andover for a summer, casually, and then heads straight to Yale Law School.
Where his classmates included Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Guinier. I mean, we are talking about a powerhouse cohort, people who would go on to shape the Supreme Court and legal theory for decades to come.
And after he graduates in 1974, he doesn't go to some big corporate firm on Wall Street to make millions.
No. His first job is with the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund.
Of course.
Then he becomes a trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Labor. He goes to the London School of Economics on a Rockefeller Fellowship. And then eventually, he becomes the chief administrative law judge for the New York State Division of Human Rights.
And he was the first Puerto Rican to hold that post.
The very first.
Now, administrative law, I think for a lot of people, it sounds kind of dry. The machinery of bureaucracy.
It can be.
But looking at his docket from that time, we're talking racial harassment, sexual harassment, AIDS discrimination in the early 90s. These are not dry cases. These are the raw wounds of society.
And that is where the weight accumulates, right? Being a judge, especially in that field, means you're absorbing trauma. You're the filter through which all this human misery passes to hopefully find some kind of resolution.
You have to be impartial, but you cannot be unfeeling.
Exactly. And there is this fascinating anecdote from a former student of his, a Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo, that really illustrates how Manuel managed this weight and how he transmitted his knowledge.
This story really grounded the whole thing for me. Ibarrondo describes growing up in Harlem, and he's asking his mother these questions.
The big questions.
Yeah, why are we poor? Why are there drugs and gangs? Why is it like this?
Right. The fundamental questions of inequality. And his mother, who had a second-grade education, she taught him patience. She gave him love, but she couldn't give him the structural answer.
She couldn't explain redlining or systemic disenfranchisement?
No. So he talks about basically living in bookstores, just trying to figure out how the whole system works. And then he meets Manuel del Valle at Fordham University, where Manuel was teaching.
And listen to what Ibarrondo says here. This is a quote. Manuel became the bridge between my questions and my life's work.
That's powerful.
He says Manuel taught him not just where to find the answers, but how to conceptualize and articulate my knowledge.
And that distinction is just vital. It's not about just dumping facts on a student. It's about giving them the architecture, the blueprint to build their own arguments.
Exactly. Ibarrondo calls him an Ivy League-educated legal scholar who converged with his other influences to shape his whole journey. It perfectly highlights Manuel's role as a bridge.
He bridges that raw experience of inequality, which he knew firsthand from the projects, with the intellectual tools to fight it, which he gained in the ivory tower.
So, okay, we have established the man, the lawyer, the scholar, the bridge. Now let's pivot to the poet. Because in this collection, Escape, he is processing all of this. He's trying to draft a blueprint for something the law can't quite touch.
And he starts with some really interesting themes, especially regarding technology and perception. Considering the source material is from 2026 and where we are now in this hyper-digital age, his take is incredibly relevant.
There's a poem titled, Tech is Not the New Art.
I love a good hot take in verse.
So what's his argument?
It's a critique of algorithmic culture, really. He argues that modernity has created soulless machines, and he contrasts today's tech with Leonardo da Vinci. He says, Da Vinci designed parachutes and helicopters, sure, but he did it with his eyes. He did it with soul.
He writes, the lifeless machine is an artifice without soul.
That's a pretty damning line.
It is. He says technology creates predictability, it's controlled, it's filtered, it's biased, whereas art
is free.
Art is free to flow. He has this great line, until it escapes the confines of its programming, it will never be a Mona Lisa.
Which is so ironic because, and we'll get to this later, there is an AI tribute to him included in the source material. The irony is just palpable. But it shows he's engaging with the world as it is now. He's not a Luddite, he's a humanist. He's basically saying, use the tool, but for God's sake, don't mistake the tool for the creator.
There's another poem that really stood out to me called Captive to a Long Wooden Desk. This one felt so autobiographical, thinking about his legal life.
Yes. The imagery here is so precise, isn't it? He talks about drafting a bungalow. He mentions using a 4H pencil for its lightness and precision, and a 2H pencil for details.
I love that specificity. I mean, who knows the difference between a 4H and a 2H pencil? A draftsman, an architect.
It speaks to his obsession with detail. But look at the metaphor. The blueprint on the desk represents the structured life, the square and vertical lines.
That's the law. The law is a blueprint for society. It's
Yeah.
rigid, it's defined, it's annotated.
But in his head, what's happening in his head?
In his head, he envisions a structure filled with light, one that conforms to nature.
It's the tension between rendering reality, drawing the lines, and actually living it. He writes about the erasers to clean off the alterations.
Which, in law, you can do. You can vacate a judgment, you can amend a complaint, you can erase the error on the official record.
But in life, as he says, the eraser tears the paper. You can't just fix memory or trauma with a motion to dismiss.
So the structure in his mind is always more fluid, more harmonious than the one on the desk.
Which is why he needs poetry. Poetry is the space where the lines don't have to be straight.
And speaking of fluidity and perception, we have to talk about the blindfold poem.
He wore a blindfold made of a black and white elephant print.
This is just a powerful experiment in empathy. The poem describes him walking around a market, blindfolded, not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand the world of a friend of his who was blind.
He talks about bumping into stalls and tables and people, the total disorientation. And then this dawning realization that for him, at any moment, he could just take the blindfold off.
But for his friend, this world went on forever.
It connects right back to his work as an administrative law judge, specifically hearing cases that involved disabled children. You know, most judges, they look at medical records, they look at the data.
Objective facts.
Right. But Manuel is trying to inhabit the phenomenology of the disability. He's trying to feel the edges of the world as the claimant feels them.
He calls it a special truth. He writes, "Life was not an experiment, but about learning to appreciate that there is a special truth in each life."
It's radical empathy. It's a rejection of that objective legal distance in favor of a really subjective understanding. It forces him to pause, to breathe. It's a very grounding poem amidst all this high-level intellectualizing.
Okay, let's move into our next section, the university poems. Because even though he's this incredibly accomplished figure now, he looks back and he really captures that feeling of being young and out of place and just trying to find your footing.
There's a poem called Escaping on a Bus to New Haven. And if you've ever left home for the first time, I mean, this one just hits hard.
He describes leaving the fears and insecurities of the Harlem projects for the ivory towers of Yale.
And the sensory details are so good here.
Yeah.
He talks about the crisp air of Long Island Sound, but then the reality check hits. He writes, "There is no escaping a New York accent."
Oof. Yeah, that feeling that no matter how smart you are or what you've achieved, your voice immediately marks you as different.
Exactly. He mentions the other students from Oklahoma and Los Angeles and Georgia. They're all in this dorm together.
Yeah.
But he carries Manhattan, what he calls the center of the center, and the fears of the city streets with him. He feels that imposter syndrome, not just intellectually, but almost biologically.
He talks about the lounge chairs you just sank into in the library, which you have to imagine coming from the projects must have felt like landing on a different planet.
But the poem turns, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It goes from feeling like an imposter to finding a purpose. He realizes that all of this was preparation for a return to self. The goal became to return to the community, to lead. He writes about providing hope to communities consumed by poverty. So the escape to Yale wasn't an abandonment at all.
No, it was a supply run.
A supply run. That's perfect. He was going there to get the tools to bring back home.
I love that. And then there's this other university moment that is just so normal,
Yeah.
human. The poem, hugging onto his friend's leather jacket.
Yes. This is what you call the moment of decompression.
Set the scene for us.
So he's at the university. He's riding on the back of a friend's motorbike. And they ride from the campus down to the university lake. And the poem explicitly says they are doing this to escape syntax, data, and philosophy.
They just wanted to get away from all the smart talk.
Precisely. They lie down on a blanket under the stars. And what do they talk about? Do they debate legal theory? Do they talk about Puerto Rican independence?
No, they talk about the cafeteria food.
Whether it had improved since their freshman days, whether there was hot water for a shower. It is so incredibly grounding.
It shows that even the great intellectual, the future historian, just needs to complain about the dorms and look at the stars sometimes.
It humanizes him. It shows that the pressure of that environment, the Socratic questioning, the constant analysis, it takes a toll. You need to escape the intellect itself sometimes.
And that ties perfectly into this next section we wanted to talk about, the emotional and spiritual escapes, because he has a lot to say about the burden of the intellect.
He really does. There's a poem titled Intellectual Questions, And he does not hold back. He actually attacks the very method he was trained in.
The Socratic method.
Yes, he critiques Socratic questioning.
Yeah.
Now, you have to remember, for a lawyer, the Socratic method is the holy grail. It's how you learn the law. You question relentlessly to expose contradictions and find the truth. But in this poem, he calls it a form of bullying.
He says prying why questions can break hearts.
Just think about that for a second. The question why can be an accusation. Why did you do this? Why didn't you stop it? In a courtroom, those questions get to the legal truth.
But in a relationship.
Or, in a community dealing with trauma, those same questions cause a rupture. He writes, sometimes listening is more important than analyzing.
It feels like a critique of the whole Western intellectual tradition, really, the idea that we have to dissect everything to understand it. He's suggesting that this relentless questioning ends in the rupture of potential relationships.
And he contrasts this with a much more mystical sort of healing approach. There's another poem he sought to escape from his insecurities where he talks about wearing crystals.
Lapis lazuli and citrine.
Lapis lazuli for communication and citrine for confidence.
And again, the setting here is just crucial. Where is he wearing these crystals?
In a pharmaceutical lab.
That is the best image. You have these colleagues in their sparkling white lab coats, doing hard science, developing medicines, alleviating disease.
And then you have Manuel, who he says became the first among them, wearing his mystical pendants to deal with his trauma and his insecurity.
It shows he doesn't see these things as contradictory at all. Science heals the body. The crystals, or at least the belief in them, heal the spirit. He writes that the rejections of his life made him stronger, but the pendants were his armor.
It's a completely syncretic approach to survival. He uses the law for the world and the crystals for the self.
And speaking of spiritual armor, we have to talk about the paradox of the fox. This poem felt very different from the others. Very Zen.
Extremely Zen. It really reflects his study of Asian languages and philosophies. The title itself is a koan. To escape a fox, be like a fox.
To avoid a fight, do not participate.
It's the philosophy of non-resistance. I mean, in the West, we're taught to conquer the obstacle, to defeat the enemy, to kill the fox.
Right.
But Manuel is arguing that true escape is transformation. If you become the fox can no longer hunt you.
To accept the stranger, accept yourself.
Exactly. It suggests that the real escape isn't running away, it's a kind of transformation. You escape the confrontation by becoming a constellation of peace.
He writes, to bear witness to truth, be prepared to die. And to fly to the constellations, be prepared to transform into light.
It's a dissolving of the ego, which is just fascinating coming from a man who has achieved so much ego-driven success. All the awards, the titles, first Puerto Rican to do this, chief judge of that.
And yet in his poetry, he is trying to let all of that go.
He's telling us that the ultimate victory isn't to win the fight, but to stop fighting and start becoming.
Which brings us to the inevitable end of all things. Our last section, entropy and legacy. Because for all the escaping we do in life, there is one thing you simply can't escape.
The final exit. Death.
Entropy.
He has a poem titled, Life Has a Way of Wiping Out All Escape Routes. A very cheery title.
Very, but he talks about physics. Entropy governs all matter. Plans are dashed. The beautiful blueprint you drew with your 4H pencil
Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. Entropy always wins.
It sounds incredibly bleak. It would be, if he stopped at the material level. But he argues that if you deal in matter, then yes, you are doomed. But the spirit is not limited.
So what's the solution?
He suggests detaching from the world through meditation, letting the soul fly back to where it came from.
It's the ultimate escape. Escaping the material world entirely. And before that final escape, he writes about the smaller fade-outs that happen all the time. The ghosts of fading friendships.
This one really hit home for me. The poem, Sometimes We Fade Away. He talks about friends becoming calcified memories.
Yeah.
We watch their lives play out on social media. We see the pictures, but the actual connection is gone. It's just a ghost.
And what's his advice? It's so simple. A simple smile will do.
Let the ghosts go.
Yeah.
It's very practical advice. Don't chase the ghosts of past friendships. By releasing that connection, you allow their real journey to commence, and yours as well.
It's an escape from the obligation of the past.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we wrap this up, we have to mention the anonymous AI.
Yes, the source material actually includes a tribute in verse that was written by an AI.
Which is just wild considering his poem about tech being soulless. But the AI, it actually writes something kind of beautiful.
It really does. It describes Manuel as walking barefoot through thresholds of law and lyric.
Carrying scrolls of justice in one hand and the quiet fire of poems in the other.
I mean, that is a surprisingly accurate and poetic summary. The AI acknowledges his reverence for goddesses of every myth and children of forgotten empires. It seems that even the algorithm recognizes that Manuel is a variable that can't quite be pinned down.
So after all this, what does it all mean? We've looked at the projects in Harlem, the halls of Yale, the courtrooms, the pharmaceutical labs, and these quiet moments under the stars.
Well, if we look at the list of his other works, I mean, the titles alone tell a story. The Geometry of Love, Magic, Wizards and Wisdom, Diary of a Puerto Rican Yali. We see a man who is just constantly expanding.
The mission of this deep dive was to understand escape. And I think we found that for Manuel del Valle Colón, escape is not about abandonment.
No, not at all. It's about expansion. It's about escaping the narrow definitions that society tries to put on you.
Escaping the definition of poor kid from the projects.
Escaping the definition of stiff lawyer.
Escaping the definition of tech-obsessed modern human.
He escaped poverty to gain influence, but he never truly escaped his roots. He returned to defend them.
He escaped the rigidity of the law to write poetry, but he brought the precision of the law into his verse.
Precisely. He refused to be a static data point.
And that leads us to our final thought. Manuel has a poem where he writes, "In this digital age, there is no escaping the ones and the zeros."
He warns that we are all being reduced to binary code. You're a leader or a follower. You're rich or poor. You're a 1 or a 0.
So here is our question for you, the listener. In a world that is constantly demanding that you be a 1 or a 0, a fixed data point in the algorithm, how can you use art or memory or even just a deep breath to become a variable again?
How do you draft a blueprint for your life that still leaves room for the light to get in?
Are you using a 4H pencil to draw lines that can be moved? Or are you just filling in the boxes someone else drew for you?
To escape the algorithm of your own life, you might just have to become the fox.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Manuel del Valle Colón.